Lyra had almost finished braiding her daughter's fur when the sky turned black. The IT was not clouds. It was not a storm. It was ships, dozens of them, dropping through the atmosphere of Haven like dark stones falling into still water. They made no sound at first. Then the sonic booms hit, one after another, shaking windows and rattling doors across the colony. Haven was supposed to be safe. That was the whole point of it. For species living together on a quiet world at the edge of cooperative space. Humans, Fenari, Talusi, and Grand families sharing neighborhoods and schools and parks. Children of different species growing up side by side, learning each other's languages, playing each other's games. It was the kind of place the Galactic Cooperative put on posters. Lyra pulled her daughter close and looked out the window. The ships were Dravine. She knew them by their shape, long and segmented like the bodies of the insects they resembled. Every species in the galaxy knew those ships. The Dravine Dominion had ruled their corner of space for over 1,000 years, and they did not visit places without a reason. The soldiers came down on drop pods. They were tall, nearly 3 meters, with black armored shells and 4-clawed arms. They moved fast and with purpose. They swept through the streets in organized lines, kicking open doors, scanning rooms. But they were not killing everyone. They were selecting. They were taking the children. Lyra screamed when they pulled her daughter from her arms. She bit one of the soldiers on his lower arm, and he threw her against a wall without even looking at her. Her son tried to run. They caught him in a stasis net that froze his body mid-step, his small face locked in an expression of pure terror. All across Haven, the same thing was happening. Dravine soldiers moved through every district, every block, every home. They ignored the adults unless someone fought back. Those who did were killed quickly. A human father who charged a soldier with a kitchen knife was cut down in front of his family. A grand mother who wrapped her massive arms around her child was hit with a pulse weapon that stopped her heart. The humans fought the hardest. That was something the Dravine had not expected. In most species, the adults froze or fled when faced with overwhelming force. The humans didn't either. They attacked with anything they could find. Pipes, tools, chairs, bare hands. A retired human woman in her 70s broke a Dravine soldier's eye cluster with a thrown brick. They killed her, but she had already bought time for 3 Talusi children to escape through a back window. The IT did not matter. The Dravine were too many and too well armed. In 90 minutes, they took 300 children from Haven. Fenari, Talusi, Gran, and human. They loaded them into transport ships and lifted off without a word. No demands, no explanation, no negotiation. They came, they took, and they left. The colony fell silent after that. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of something broken. Parents wandered the streets calling names that no one answered. Fenari mothers sat in doorways and wailed in their high, keening way that sounded like whined through broken glass. Grand fathers stood motionless, unable to process what had happened to their bonded young. Talusi families huddled together, trembling, their color-shifting skin gone pale gray with grief, and the humans. The humans were quiet in a different way. Emergency signals went out within minutes. Ships were called. Cooperative channels were flooded with distress messages. Medical teams arrived from neighboring systems within hours. But for the parents of Haven, none of it mattered. Their children were gone, taken into the void by a species that had been doing this to weaker races for centuries. Admiral Rowan Sari arrived on Haven 6 hours after the raid. He was not there in an official capacity. He was there because his 12-year-old daughter Farah had been visiting a school friend on the colony when the Dravine came. She was among the taken. Ro was a big man with gray at his temples and hands that had seen both war and peace. He had commanded fleets. He had negotiated treaties. He had buried soldiers and toasted victories. But when he walked through the ruined school where the children had been playing that morning, something in his face changed. He found Farah's shoe near an overturned desk. Small, white, with a little star she had drawn on the toe in blue ink. He picked it up and held it and said nothing. A Fenari aid worker nearby watched him and later described what she saw. She said the human did not cry. He did not shout. He did not break things. He simply stood there holding that small shoe, and every living creature within 10 meters felt something shift in the air around him. Like the temperature had dropped, like gravity had increased, like something very old and very dangerous had just woken up. Lyra was sitting on the ground outside, wrapped in a shock blanket, staring at nothing. Ro walked past her and stopped. He looked down at the Fenari woman, and she looked up at him. Neither of them spoke, but something passed between them in that moment. An understanding that crossed every barrier of species and language and biology. Their children were gone. And that was not something either of them was willing to accept. Ro placed Farah's shoe carefully inside his jacket, close to his chest. Then he walked to his shuttle, sat down, and began making calls. Across the galaxy, in offices and war rooms and quiet homes, humans answered. And when they heard what had happened on Haven, every single one of them said the same thing. When do we leave? The Galactic Cooperative Council Chamber was the largest enclosed space ever built by any species. It could seat representatives from over 200 worlds, and on this day, nearly all of them were filled. The air hummed with translators working overtime, converting languages and pheromone signals and color patterns into something everyone could understand. Ro Ansari stood at the central podium and waited for silence. He did not have to wait long. Something about the way the human carried himself made the room go quiet on its own, that he laid out the facts without emotion. The Dravine had raided Haven. 300 children taken, 40 of them human. No warning, no demands, no communication. He presented the footage, the damage reports, the casualty lists. He showed a photograph of a Fenari toddler being carried by a Dravine soldier, the child's face frozen in a silent scream. Then he presented the history. Files that human intelligence had gathered over decades. The Dravine had been taking children from weaker species for over 600 years. Thousands of young from dozens of races, used for labor, experimentation, and biological harvesting. It was not a secret. Everyone in the chamber knew. They had always known. Chancellor Dalmari, the ancient Pelian who led the council, spoke first. His voice was slow and deep like roots growing through stone. He expressed profound sympathy. He condemned the actions in the strongest possible terms. And then he explained why the council could not act. The Dravine controlled 40% of the galaxy's major trade routes. They supplied 60% of refined starship fuel. Sanctions would cripple dozens of economies. Military action would trigger a war that could last decades. The best path forward, Dalmari said, was diplomatic engagement. A formal protest. Perhaps a committee. Ro listened to all of it without moving. Lyra spoke next. She had traveled with Ro to the station because he had asked her to come, and because she had nothing left to lose. She was small even by Fenari standards, barely reaching Ro's waist, with copper-colored fur and dark eyes that had not stopped leaking tears since Haven. She told the council what the Dravine did with the children they took. She described the labor camps. The medical facilities where young were cut open and studied while still alive. The breeding programs where stolen children were forced to produce offspring for further experimentation. She described these things in a clear, small voice that the translators carried to every corner of the chamber. Several delegates looked away. A few covered their sensory organs. The Grand representative, a massive stone-skinned being, lowered his head and closed all four eyes. The vote was held. 147 species voted against intervention. 31 abstained. 22 voted in favor, most of them smaller species who had lost children to the Dravine themselves. The council chose trade over children. It was not the first time. It would not be the last. After the vote, Lyra found Ro standing alone in a corridor overlooking the stars. She walked up to him and asked the question that had been burning inside her since Haven. "What will you do now?" Ro looked down at her. "Humans do not negotiate for children," he said. "We do not file protests. We do not form committees." "Then what?" Lyra asked. "That we go get them," Ro said. "And then we make sure this never happens again." To anyone, Lyra stared at him. She had met humans before, lived beside them on Haven, watched their children play with her own. She thought she understood them. But in that moment, looking into Ro's dark, steady eyes, she realized she had understood nothing at all. The message from Rho reached Earth's United Defense Command at 0400 hours, Coordinated Universal Time. By 0600, every major military installation in human space was active. By noon, the mobilization order had been issued. By evening, the first fleets were moving. There was no debate, no political argument, no discussion about cost or risk or strategy. The message was simple, and it spread from world to world like fire. They took our children down the colony of New Brisbane. A retired sergeant packed his old combat armor and kissed his wife goodbye. On the orbital station above Mars, a squadron of fighter pilots canceled their leave and reported for duty. On a farming world in the outer systems, a grandmother loaded medical supplies onto a cargo shuttle and told her grandson she would be back when the kids were home. Ships powered up across 20-star systems. Carriers, destroyers, frigates, medical ships, supply vessels. The full weight of humanity's military began to move in a single direction toward Dravine space. The Galactic Cooperative watched with a mixture of confusion and alarm. Other species went to war for territory, for resources, for political power, for survival. These were things the galaxy understood, but the humans were not going to war for any of those things. They were going to war because someone had taken children. Not just human children, all the children. 300 kids from 4 species, and the humans were not sorting them by origin. Every child taken was every human child now that a cooperative intelligence analyst filed a report that week trying to explain the human mobilization to the council. She was a Pelian scholar who had studied humanity for 30 years. Her report was 400 pages long, but the summary was only one sentence. They are coming, and they will not stop until every child is home. The report was read. The council did nothing, and across the dark between stars, the human fleet burned toward Dravine space with a fury that made the void itself seem warm. The Dravine had not laughed in 600 years of recorded history. Their species did not possess the biology for it. But when Broodlord Zorovash received the reports of human ships moving toward his borders, the closest thing to amusement rippled through his ancient body. Humans. The soft, short-lived mammals who had barely figured out faster-than-light travel a century ago. The species that spent half its waking hours consuming stimulant liquids and arguing about fictional stories. These creatures were going to challenge the dominion that had crushed empires before humanity had learned to make fire. Dro Vash sent a single message to the Galactic Cooperative. It was brief. He called the humans emotional and irrational. He warned that any military action against the Dominion would result in the complete destruction of the human species. He suggested the cooperative restrain its youngest member before it hurt itself. Ro Ansari read the message. He did not reply. What Dro Vash did not know, and what no species in the galaxy had yet understood, was that humans had been preparing for this from the moment the first child was loaded onto a Dravine transport. While Ro was standing in the Cooperative Council chamber delivering a speech, human intelligence teams were already deep inside Dravine space. They moved in small ships disguised as merchant vessels. They bribed, hacked, and infiltrated their way through border checkpoints. Within 4 days of the raid on Haven, human operatives had mapped every Dravine patrol route in 3 sectors, identified the holding facility on the moon Dravos, 7 where the children were being kept, and planted signal disruption devices on 14 communication relays. The Dravine did not notice. They had never needed to watch for spies. No species had ever been foolish enough to sneak into their territory. Their security was built on fear, not vigilance, and humans did not fear them. The human fleet arrived at the Dravine border on a Tuesday. It did not arrive as one force. It came as 5 separate battle groups, hitting 5 different points along the border simultaneously. Each group was large enough to look like the main attack. Each moved with a speed and coordination that the Dravine had never encountered. The Dravine border defense was strong. Their ships were larger, heavier, and more heavily armed than anything humanity fielded. A single Dravine dreadnought outgunned 3 human cruisers. By every calculation, the Dravine should have held. They did not hold. The first engagement happened at the fortress world of Calcis. The Dravine fleet formed their standard defensive formation, a layered wall of ships designed to absorb attacks and grind enemies down through attrition. It had worked against every species that had ever challenged them. The humans did not attack the wall. They went around it. 3 fast destroyer groups slipped through gaps in the formation, while a 4th group drew fire from the front. The 5th group dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly behind the Dravine line, a maneuver so reckless that Dravine tactical computers flagged it as a navigation error. IT was not an error. The humans had calculated the jump to within 100 meters. They opened fire before the Dravine rearguard could turn around. The battle at Calcis lasted 6 hours. The Dravine lost 43 ships. The humans lost 19. But it was not the numbers that shook the Dravine commanders. It was how the humans fought. A damaged human frigate, engines failing and weapons down to 30%, turned directly into a Dravine carrier and accelerated. The collision tore both ships apart, but opened a hole in the Dravine formation that 3 human cruisers poured through. A fighter pilot whose craft had lost its main guns flew her ship into the sensor array of a Dravine command vessel, blinding it long enough for a torpedo strike to finish the job. She ejected half a second before impact. These were not the actions of a rational military force. These were the actions of something that did not care about survival. Something that had decided the mission was worth more than living. That a Dravine fleet commander named Charval sent an urgent report to DRO Vash after the battle. "The humans are not fighting like soldiers," she wrote. "They are fighting like a nest species defending its brood. They accept damage that no rational actor would accept. They trade their own lives for tactical advantage without hesitation. This is not warfare as we understand it." DRO Vash read the report and dismissed it. Emotion was weakness. It always had been. While the space battles raged across 3 sectors, Sergeant Hannah Osei was sitting in the cargo bay of a stealth transport, checking her weapon for the 11th time. She was 30 years old, built like a combat athlete, with close-cropped hair and steady hands. Around her sat 42 soldiers from the 7th Rapid Response Unit, the best ground fighters humanity had. Their mission was simple: get to Dravos 7. Get inside the facility. Get the children out. Every child. Every species. No one left behind. The transport dropped out of stealth mode on the dark side of the moon. Anti-aircraft fire lit up the sky within seconds. The pilot dodged and weaved through a storm of energy blasts, bringing them down hard on a ridge 2 kilometers from the facility's outer wall. Hannah hit the ground running. Her team spread out behind her in a practice formation. Dravine ground troops moved to intercept, and the night erupted with weapons fire. A Talusi medic in Hannah's unit took a hit in the first minute. His leg shattered below the knee. Hannah grabbed him, threw him across her back, and kept moving. She fired with one hand and carried him with the other, covering 200 meters of open ground under enemy fire without slowing down. They reached the outer wall. Charges were set. The wall blew inward, and Hannah Osei stepped through the smoke into the place where they kept the children. The smell hit them first: cold stone, chemical disinfectant, and something underneath that Hannah's brain recognized before her mind could name it. Fear. The deep, old, animal smell of creatures that had been afraid for a very long time. The facility on Dravos 7 was built underground, carved into the rock of the moon itself. It stretched downward in a series of levels connected by ramps wide enough for Dravine soldiers to move 4 abreast. The walls were bare. The lighting was dim and blue, tuned to Dravine visual preferences. For every other species, it felt like walking into a cave that never ended. Hannah's team cleared the first level in 8 minutes. Dravine guards fought back, but they were facility security, not frontline soldiers. They were used to controlling prisoners, not facing human special forces who had spent the entire trip here imagining what they would find out on the 2nd level. They found the labs. The rooms were clean and white and horrible. Tables with restraints sized for small bodies. Medical instruments arranged in neat rows. Sample containers lining the walls, filled with things Hannah forced herself not to look at too closely. Records showed that the Dravine had been studying the biological differences between species young, testing pain responses, healing rates, psychological breaking points. Private Asher, the youngest soldier on Hannah's team, stopped in one of the labs and stared at a small restraint table. His hands began to shake. Hannah put her hand on his shoulder and squeezed once hard. "Not now," she said. "After." He nodded and kept moving. The cells were on the third level. Row after row of small rooms carved into rock, sealed with energy barriers. The children inside were from all 4 species taken from Haven, sorted and separated. The Fenari children were in the worst condition. Their fur had been shaved in patches where tissue samples had been taken. They huddled together in groups of 3 or 4, their large eyes reflecting the blue light. When they saw the human soldiers, they pressed against the back walls of their cells, making themselves as small as possible. The Talusi young had been separated from their bonded siblings. Talusi children formed deep psychological bonds in pairs, and breaking those bonds caused severe mental damage. Several of the Talusi kids sat alone in their cells, rocking slowly, their color-shifting skin locked in a dull gray that meant profound distress. The Gron children were sedated. The Dravine had learned quickly that young Gron, even small ones, were strong enough to damage the cell barriers when frightened. So they kept them drugged. They lay in their cells like small boulders, barely breathing, and the human children were kept in isolation. Every single one in a separate cell, as far apart as the facility allowed. A Dravine research note explained why. When grouped together, the note read, "Human juveniles organize. They establish hierarchies, coordinate resistance, and become significantly more difficult to manage. Even subjects as young as 6 standard years display this behavior. Isolation is recommended." Hannah found them one by one. She opened each cell personally. Some of the children cried. Some were silent. A few had injuries that had never been treated. All of them had the same look in their eyes, the look of someone who had stopped expecting rescue. In the 14th cell, she found a 10-year-old boy named Dowd. He was thin and bruised, with bite marks on both forearms. When the energy barrier dropped, he did not run to Hannah. He stood up straight, looked her in the eye, and said there were little ones on the level below. "Fenari babies. The guards took them down there yesterday. Please get them first." Hannah knelt, so she was at his eye level. "We are getting everyone," she said. "Every single one. But I need you to help me." "Can you do that?" Dowd nodded. He had been organizing the older human children through the walls, tapping codes they had invented, passing information, keeping the younger ones calm. When the guards had come to take a Fenari toddler for testing, Dowd had grabbed the guard's arm and held on until they beat him loose. The bite marks were from the guard's mandibles, that he was 10 years old, and he had fought a Dravine soldier with his bare hands to protect a child that was not even his species. Hannah sent teams to every level. They opened every cell. Human medics began treating injuries immediately, working on Fenari and Talusi and Gron children with the same focus and care they gave their own. A combat medic named Priya sat on the floor for 20 minutes holding a Gron infant that had just come out of sedation, keeping the child calm with her heartbeat while the drugs wore off. Lyra had insisted on coming with the rescue team. Roa tried to stop her, but she had looked at him with those dark Fenari eyes and said her children were in there and she was going. He let her go. She found her children on the 3rd level. Her daughter recognized her immediately and ran to her, burying her face in Lyra's fur. Her son, younger, smaller, stood in the corner of his cell and did not move. He stared at her like she was a stranger. It took Lyra 15 minutes of sitting on the cold floor, singing a Fenari lullaby in a broken voice, before he finally walked to her and let her hold him. Roe received the calm update on his flagship. Farah was alive. Broken arm, untreated but alive. She told him she had tried to protect the smaller kids. She told him she was sorry she could not do more. Roe told her she did good. Then he closed the channel and sat alone in his quarters for a long time. The last image broadcast to the galaxy from Dravos 7 was taken by a helmet camera. It showed Hannah Osei walking out of the facility into the pale light of the moon's surface. In her arms was a sleeping Gron infant, no bigger than a human toddler, with 4 small arms wrapped tightly around Hannah's neck. Hannah looked into the camera, and the galaxy saw her face. Exhausted, filthy, streaked with dust and other things. And absolutely certain. "Nobody touches them again," she said. "Nobody." Every species in the galaxy saw the footage from Dravos 7. The cells, the labs, the restraint tables sized for small bodies. The faces of the children when the doors opened. It spread across every communication network in known space within hours, and it burned through the political indifference that had protected the Dravine for centuries like fire through dry wood. The Cooperative Council held an emergency session. Chancellor Dalmari called for calm. He urged patience. He reminded the chamber that the situation was complex, that he was shouted down for the first time in 40 years of leadership. Ro Ansari addressed the galaxy from the bridge of his flagship. He was calm. He was always calm. That was what made his words land so hard. The children are safe, he said. But we are not done. The Dravine have been taking children from your worlds, your families, your people for 600 years. The facilities on Dravos 7 held records going back generations. Thousands of children from dozens of species, taken and never returned. This is not a border dispute. This is not politics. This is a crime that has been happening in plain sight, while every government in this galaxy chose to look away. Humanity will not look away. We will push forward until the Dravine Dominion can never take another child from any species again. You can join us, or you can watch. But we are not stopping. He cut the transmission. The galaxy made its choice. Not the governments. Not the councils. The people. The Fenari were first. Their fleet was small, barely 30 ships. Most of them converted merchant vessels with weapons bolted to their hulls. They were not warships. They would not survive a direct battle. But they showed up at the human staging point and asked where they were needed. Ro assigned them to supply and escort duty, keeping the human fleet fed and fueled. The Talusi sent their medical corps. 12 hospital ships staffed with the finest doctors in the cooperative. They asked for nothing in return. They simply arrived and began treating the wounded. The Grand shocked everyone. They were the galaxy's most committed pacifists, a species that had not fought a war in 8,000 years. They did not send weapons. They sent cargo haulers, 50 massive, stone-hulled transports loaded with food, building materials, and power generators. Their message to Ro was 3 words long. For the children, even species that had no direct stake in the conflict sent support. A race of deep space miners donated fuel. An aquatic species offered their listening stations for intelligence gathering. A collective of traders opened their routes to human supply ships free of charge. The Dravine watched this with growing unease. They had ruled through isolation, keeping species divided and afraid. They had never faced a coalition because they had never given the galaxy a reason to unite. Until now, the human fleet pushed into Dravine space like a blade. They did not stop at the border worlds. They did not negotiate. They moved from system to system with a speed that Dravine strategists could not match. Every defensive line the Dravine established was flanked, outmaneuvered, or simply punched through by human ships that refused to retreat. The Dravine military had been built over 1,000 years to fight frightened, disorganized species that attacked alone. They had no doctrine for fighting an enemy that was coordinated, adaptive, and motivated by something their strategists could not model. Dravine tactical computers kept predicting human withdrawal points, moments where the cost of continuing should force a rational actor to pull back. The humans blew past every one of them. Broodlord Daro Vash felt something he had not experienced in 6 centuries of rule. He was afraid. He sent a diplomatic message offering to return all abducted individuals from all species. Every child, every person, everyone the Dravine had ever taken. Ro's response was one line. Returning stolen children is not a negotiation. It is a starting point. The final battle happened above Dravine Prime, the homeworld. The human-led coalition fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a formation that filled the sky. Behind the human warships flew Fenari escorts, Talusi hospital ships, and Grand supply haulers. A fleet built not from one species, but from a galaxy that had finally decided to act. The Dravine Royal Fleet fought. They fought hard and they fought well, because whatever else they were old and they were proud. But pride does not win wars against an enemy that has already decided the outcome. The battle lasted 9 hours. When it ended, the Dravine Royal Fleet existed only as debris. ground forces secured the capital. Dro Vash was found in his chambers, attempting to access an escape vessel. He was brought before Ro in restraints. The Broodlord towered over the human, even in chains. He looked down with his ancient compound eyes and asked the question that his species had never needed to ask before. What kind of creatures destroy an empire over a handful of offspring? Ro looked up at him. Something flickered across his face. Not anger, not satisfaction. Something quieter and infinitely more dangerous. They're not offspring, Ro said. They're children. Then he turned and walked away. He had a daughter waiting for him, and a promise to keep. Behind him, Dro Vash stood in the ruins of everything his species had built, and for the first time in his 600 years of life, the Broodlord understood that he had made the one mistake the universe does not forgive. He had hurt the young of a species that would burn down heaven itself to protect them. The Dravine Dominion died, not with a roar, but with a silence that spread across their worlds like frost, settling into empty throne rooms and abandoned military bases and the hollow shells of civilization that had believed itself eternal. The dismantling took months. Cooperative oversight teams moved through Dravine space system by system, cataloging, disarming, accounting. The Dravine people were not destroyed. Ro had been very clear about that from the beginning. This was not genocide. This was surgery. The military was dissolved. The leadership was arrested. The systems that had enabled centuries of cruelty were taken apart piece by piece, and the children came home. Not just the 300 from Haven. From deep inside Dravine territory, from facilities hidden on moons and buried under mountain ranges and floating in the dark between stars, they found them. Thousands of them, taken from dozens of species over hundreds of years. Some were still children. Many were adults now, grown up in captivity, who had never seen their own homeworlds or met another member of their species. A Fenari woman was reunited with her brother, who had been taken 40 years ago. He did not speak Fenari anymore. He had forgotten the language. She taught it to him again, word by word, sitting in a garden on a cooperative station while human counselors watched from a respectful distance that a Talusi pair bond, separated as infants, found each other through genetic records that human scientists helped reconstruct. When they touched for the first time in 30 years, their skin shifted through every color their species could produce, a display of emotion so intense that witnesses from 6 different species wept. The Galactic Tribunal convened on Cooperative Station Orion. Dro Vash and 47 members of the Dravine High Command sat in the accused chamber. The charges were read in every language spoken in the cooperative. Crimes against sentient life, systematic abduction, forced experimentation, destruction of family bonds. The list took 3 hours to read. The children testified. Dowd stood before the tribunal and described organizing the older kids to protect the younger ones. He showed the scars on his arms. He was calm and clear and 10 years old, and when he finished, the chamber was so quiet that the translators had nothing to carry. Farah Ansari testified about her broken arm and the days spent in a dark cell. She testified about hearing Fenari children crying through the walls and not being able to reach them. She did not look at her father in the gallery. She did not need to doubt Lyra's youngest daughter drew a picture during her testimony. She could not yet speak clearly enough to describe what had happened. So she drew it. The tribunal entered the drawing into the permanent record. It showed a small fox-like figure in a dark room with large shapes standing over it. The shapes had 4 arms and no eyes. Dro Vash was sentenced to confinement for the remainder of his natural life. Given that Dravine broodlords could live for another 400 years, this was considered sufficient. Ro Ansari retired from the military the week after the tribunal ended. There was no ceremony. He simply filed the paperwork, returned his rank insignia, and went home. Home was Haven, rebuilt, expanded, and more alive than it had ever been. 6 species live there now instead of 4, new families drawn by the colony's reputation as a place where children were safe. The school had been rebuilt twice as large. The park had been extended to the river. Ro sat on a bench in that park on his first morning as a civilian and watched Farah play. She ran with a slight limp from the arm that had healed wrong and then been rebroken and set properly by human surgeons. She did not seem to notice it. She was chasing a grown child who was 3 times her size, both of them laughing so hard they could barely breathe. Farah came to him later, sweaty and happy, and sat beside him. She asked him if the Dravine would ever come back. He told her no. She asked how he could be sure. He put his arm around her and said because every species in the galaxy now knows what happens when you hurt children under human protection. Lyra became the Fenari ambassador to the Galactic Cooperative. Her first act was to draft the Haven Accords, a binding galactic law that declared any attack on the children of any species an automatic trigger for collective military response. It passed unanimously. Not even the species that had voted against intervention before dared oppose it now to the signing ceremony. Lyra gave a short speech. She did not talk about warships or battle tactics or the fall of empires. She said that for 600 years, the galaxy had known what the Dravine were doing, and the galaxy had done nothing. Then she said that the humans came, and they did not ask what species the children belonged to. They did not check. They treated every child as their own. And that single fact, that one impossible instinct, had changed the course of galactic history. Hannah Osei took command of the new Joint Species Rapid Response Force. Her unit's motto was chosen by the troops, a phrase in the Fenari language that translated simply as "not one more." She kept the helmet camera image from Dravos 7 on her office wall, the sleeping Grand infant, the 4 small arms around her neck, the look on her own face that said the words she had spoken out loud. Nobody touches them again. The story ended where it began. On Haven, in a park, children playing, a human toddler riding on the back of a young Gron, a Fenari girl teaching a human boy how to braid fur, a Talusi pair laughing in colors. An elderly Pelian observer sat on a bench, writing his report for the cooperative archives. He had studied hundreds of species across a long career. He had seen empires rise and fall. And after all of it, he wrote, he had finally identified the quality that made humans unique among all spacefaring civilizations, that IT was not their strength or their ships or their endurance. It was something simpler, something no other species had ever fully possessed. They were incapable of seeing a child in danger and doing nothing. Any child, from any world. He finished his report and looked up at the park. The children were still playing. The sun was warm. The sky was clear. And across the galaxy, for the first time in recorded history, the children slept without fear.